That night, the storm wasn't just cold, it was hunting. When retired SWAT officer Tom Granger stepped outside to repair a broken fence, he never expected to find a half-buried scarf, a trail swallowed by snow, and a desperate cry no one else could hear. Moments later, he and his German shepherd Max were fighting through a killer blizzard toward an abandoned cabin, where an elderly stranger lay freezing, whispering something that stopped Tom in his tracks. What she said next changed everything. Stay with me. If you want more stories of courage, survival, and the miracles that find us in the dark, make sure to subscribe. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe for more. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Winter pressed heavily against Timber Ridge as dusk settled, the storm rolling in like a slow, muffled roar across the mountains. The cabin sat alone on the slope, a stubborn square of warm amber light beneath the bruised sky. Inside, Tom Granger tightened the strap of his worn parka and paused for a moment, listening to the wind rattle the eaves with the same restless anger he had carried in his chest for years. Tom, 62, carried a presence that could fill a room even when he spoke quietly, which he usually did. His body was still built like the SWAT operator he once was. Thick forearms, squared shoulders, a neck hardened by decades of high-stress operations. His gray-streaked hair was cropped short, practical, and his face bore sharp angles, the kind that looked carved more than aged. A salt-and-pepper beard shadowed a jawline that seemed permanently clenched, not from aggression, but from long habit. Years of bracing for the worst had trained his muscles to stand guard even during peace. People used to say his storm blue eyes could read a room in seconds. Now they simply looked tired, like they had seen more endings than beginnings. But tonight, those eyes softened slightly when he glanced down at Max. The German shepherd stood by the door, his posture disciplined yet brimming with anticipation. At 4 years old, Max was in his prime. Tall, broad-chested, with deep sable fur streaked with lighter gold down his haunches. His ears stood high, alert to every shift of the wind. There was a small scar above his right foreleg, the remnant of an accident from when Tom first adopted him from a canine training center. Max had washed out of the program not for lack of intelligence, but because he bonded too deeply, too singularly, one handler, one loyalty, and the moment Tom met him, a broken soldier and a dog desperate for an anchor simply recognized each other. "Easy, boy," Tom murmured, pulling on his gloves. "We'll check the fence and get back before this mess turns ugly." Max huffed softly, the canine version of agreement, and nudged the door with his nose. When Tom opened it, the storm greeted them instantly. Snowflakes, sharp as ground glass, slashed sideways across the ridge. The temperature had dropped fast, so fast that Tom felt the cold bite through his coat before he had taken a second breath. The world outside had already turned ghost white, the horizon and tree line dissolving into one swirling veil. They moved together, man and dog, the way they always had, with patient rhythm and unspoken understanding. Tom's boots cracked through the fresh layer of snow as he approached the fence that lined the south side of his property. Several boards had been torn loose by the wind and lay half-buried nearby. He cursed under his breath but kept working, propping the wood back into place long enough to survive the night. He could repair it properly when the storm passed. If it passed. As he hammered a temporary brace into the post, a sudden flicker of movement caught Max's attention. The shepherd stiffened, muscles tightening beneath his thick winter coat. His breath fogged sharply in the frigid air as he lowered his head and sniffed along the snowbank. "What is it?" Tom asked, but the dog was already digging, paws slicing through the powder. Tom stepped closer, squinting through the swirling flakes. When Max unearthed a scrap of deep red wool, Tom felt his pulse skip. A scarf. Old, frayed at the edges, and iced stiff as a board. It didn't belong to him. It didn't belong anywhere near his property. A strange tension pulled at his spine, an instinct so old it felt bone deep. He crouched, turning the scarf over in his hands. Wind had buried it, but the snow around it wasn't untouched. There were faint impressions, half destroyed by the storm, as if someone had stumbled through hours earlier. Tracks, he muttered. Damn it. Max whined low, nudging the ground, then lifting his head in the direction of the slope that dipped toward the lower hollow. Tom followed the dog's gaze, eyes narrowing as a shape materialized between gusts of snow. A derelict structure, barely more than a silhouette, half swallowed by trees. The abandoned cabin. He hadn't thought about it in years. The place had belonged to an old miner before Tom ever moved to Timber Ridge, but after the man died, no one bothered to claim it. It wasn't safe, not even in good weather. Now, with the storm building, the idea that someone, anyone, might be near it tightened Tom's chest. He rose slowly, scarf still in hand. The wool had a smell, faint but unmistakable, old perfume and wood smoke. Probably a woman's. Elderly, from the style. And elderly people did not survive long in weather like this. A memory surged in him then. Another winter, another rescue, a woman screaming through the crackle of gunfire. His team had arrived too late. Tom shut the memory down before it could cut deeper, but the echo of failure lingered like smoke behind his ribs. He would not let a stranger die on this mountain. Not tonight. He clipped Max's leash. Not to restrain him, but to keep them connected if visibility dropped completely, and began descending the slope. Each step was slow, deliberate, carved into the snow with care only a seasoned operator would think to use. "Stay close," he said, though Max was already glued to his side, ears flat against the wind. The storm thickened the farther they walked. Snow stung Tom's face, frosting his beard and eyebrows. His breath came out in harsh bursts, but his mind, even after retirement, still worked in tactical patterns. Check surroundings, monitor wind direction, track Max's cues, conserve energy. The abandoned cabin loomed gradually into view, a crooked shape half wrapped in ice. The windows were clouded, the door warped and leaning. It was barely a shelter, more a skeleton of what once had been. But Max tugged forward, nose working, rapidly. He smelled something. Someone. Tom tightened his grip on the leash, adrenaline beginning to whisper its old, familiar language through his veins. "All right," he murmured, lowering his center of gravity as he approached. "Let's see who we're dealing with." But beneath the hard, trained exterior, another thought pulsed quietly, almost fragile. Please let them still be alive. Because Tom Granger had lived with enough ghosts, and he wasn't ready to add another. The abandoned cabin groaned under the weight of the storm as Tom Granger pushed the warped door open, a harsh draft slicing across his face. Max slipped in ahead of him, nose low, tail stiff, a silent signal that something inside was alive, weak, but alive. Tom's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, landing on a frail shape curled beside a collapsed wood stove. The realization hit him like a punch. Someone had been trying to stay warm, alone, in a place that could barely shelter them from the wind. He stepped closer. The figure was an elderly woman, small and thin beneath layers of mismatched sweaters. Her silver-white hair matted against her forehead. Her skin was pale, almost translucent under the thin light, and her breathing came shallow and uneven. When she opened her eyes, they flickered with the dull glaze of exhaustion and cold. "Ma'am," Tom said gently, dropping to one knee beside her. "My name is Tom Granger. I'm here to help you." Her lips trembled before any words came. "Cold," she whispered, the sound thin as crumpled paper. "I fell." Tom scanned her body quickly, his training still second nature. Her right wrist was swollen, bent at a wrong angle, a clear break. Probably from a fall on the ice outside. She must have dragged herself back into the cabin afterward, desperate for shelter. "You're going to be all right," he murmured, though he knew survival was far from guaranteed. A person her age couldn't last long at these temperatures. He wrapped his coat around her shoulders. "Max, bring it." The German shepherd immediately obeyed, nudging the emergency thermal blanket Tom kept in his pack. Max was a working dog by nature, even if he no longer wore a K9 badge, and the situation sharpened him. The tension in his muscles, the unwavering focus in his amber eyes. As Tom covered the woman, she blinked again, as if noticing Max for the first time. "Beautiful dog," she whispered. "He is," Tom replied, "and stubborn. He dragged me down here." A faint smile tugged at the corners of her mouth despite her shaking. "Smart, too smart." Her voice faded. "What's your name, ma'am?" Tom asked. It took her a moment to gather enough breath. "Helen," she finally breathed. "Helen Brooks." The name floated like a fragile thread in the cold air. Tom nodded. "All right, Helen, stay awake for me." But the temperature inside was brutal. The broken stove produced no warmth, and the draft seeping through every crack felt like it was trying to swallow the room whole. Tom assessed the structure. It leaned slightly, weighed down by decades of neglect and the new burden of snow piling on the roof. There was no insulation, no heat source, nothing they could rely on to keep Helen alive through the night. Tom tried to radio for help, but the static was deafening. The storm's fury had shut everything down. Lines, towers, maybe even the main road. They were on their own. He checked Helen's pulse. Thin, thready. Hypothermia was tightening its grip. "Tom," she murmured suddenly, blinking up at him with fear. "Am I dying?" Tom swallowed hard, feeling the old ache flare in his chest. The same echo that haunted him every night. A memory of another rescue gone wrong. Another life he couldn't save. "Not tonight," he said firmly. "I'm getting you out of here." As he spoke, Max's ears snapped upward. A low growl rumbled in the dog's chest. "What is it, boy?" Tom followed Max's gaze upward. The ceiling. A long, jagged crack snaked across the beams, widening with each second. Snowmelt dripped through in tiny droplets. Then, another groan, deeper than before. The roof was collapsing under the weight of the storm. "Move!" Tom barked, instincts firing. He scooped Helen into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, like a bundle of frozen twigs. Max sprinted ahead, barking sharply as another beam creaked. Tom didn't run often anymore. His knees reminded him of injuries that time never fully healed. But adrenaline overruled everything. He pushed forward, gritting his teeth as he carried Helen toward the door. The cabin shuddered violently. Snow burst through the ceiling like a ruptured dam, scattering debris across the floor. Tom dodged falling timber, one arm shielding Helen, the other pushing through the door with brute force. Max barked urgently, urging them forward. They made it through just as the cabin gave one final groan, a slow surrender, and collapsed inward behind them, sending a cloud of snow and splintered wood into the raging wind. Outside, the storm was far worse. Wind whipped so hard it felt like invisible hands clawing at Tom's face. He shifted Helen's weight in his arms, careful not to disturb her wrist. "Hang in there, Helen," he shouted over the howling wind. She clung weakly to his coat, her voice barely audible. "Thank you." Max stayed close, circling them protectively. His warm breath puffed through the cold as he pressed against Tom's leg, guiding him toward the safer ground. The descent back to Tom's cabin would be brutal, nearly a mile through steep terrain now covered in drifting snow. But staying here meant certain death. Tom adjusted his grip, bracing himself against the wind, and began the climb upward. His muscles burned almost immediately. At 62, he still trained regularly, but carrying another human through a blizzard was a test, even for younger men. Memories of past missions surfaced, the weight of wounded teammates, the sting of cold nights under merciless skies, the relentless push to get someone home alive. The storm swallowed visibility, and the world turned into a swirling void. Max barked to guide them, keeping just enough distance to scout but never straying far. His silhouette was the only marker Tom could follow. 10 minutes in, Tom's breathing had turned ragged. His thighs trembled, his gloved fingers numb around Helen's frail form. He forced himself not to stop. "Tom," Helen whispered, eyes half closed. "Why, were you out there?" "Fixing a fence," he answered, voice breathless. "Lucky timing." "No," she murmured, shaking her head faintly. "Fate." Tom didn't believe in fate. Not after what he'd seen, but tonight he didn't argue. The wind roared, ripping the words from the air anyway. Max suddenly stopped, barking twice, a warning. Tom staggered forward, squinting. A cornice of snow had formed ahead, half hidden beneath drifting powder, a sinkhole beneath it. One wrong step and he, Helen, or even Max could vanish into it. "Good boy," Tom muttered, adjusting course. Every inch upward felt like fighting an earthquake in reverse, but slowly, painfully, familiar shapes emerged through the storm, the outline of trees near his cabin, the faint orange glow he had left on earlier, a defiant ember in the blizzard. "Almost there," he whispered. Helen didn't respond. Her head rested heavily against his shoulder. Panic flickered in Tom's chest. He tightened his grip and pushed harder. Max ran ahead and pawed at the snow by the door, barking urgently. Tom stumbled the last few steps, kicking the door open with his boot. Warm air, blessed, golden, heavenly, flooded over them. He lowered Helen gently onto the couch, covering her in blankets. Max pressed his head against her knee, whining softly. Tom knelt beside her, checking her pulse again. Weak, but there. He exhaled, a long breath of relief. They had made it. Despite the storm, despite everything. But he knew the night wasn't over, not by a long shot. The wind rose like a living thing the moment Tom stepped back outside, carrying Helen wrapped tightly in blankets against his chest. The storm's fury had grown sharper, its voice a long, unbroken howl sweeping across Timber Ridge. Snow spiraled so thickly that the world became a shifting white void, erasing distance, horizon, and any sense of direction. Max moved first, bracing himself into the gale, paws sinking deep as he pushed forward with the stubborn resilience of a dog built for endurance and purpose. His thick sable coat, dusted with frost, clung close to his muscular frame, and every few steps he looked back to ensure Tom and Helen still followed. Tom tightened his scarf around his face, but the cold still sliced through his skin. He had crossed hostile terrain in the past. Mountain raids, desert extractions, urban blackouts, but nothing borrowed breath the way a mountain winter storm did. At 62, his bones protested every stride, but his mind stayed razor-focused, operating on the old instincts he once relied on when the margin between life and death was measured by seconds. "Keep steady, Max," Tom shouted, though the wind swallowed half the sound. Max responded with a short bark, sharp, precise, confident. The dog pressed on, carving a path through the snow with unyielding determination. Helen shivered violently in Tom's arms, though he shielded her as best he could against his chest and coat. Her breath rattled with a thin, uneven tremor. "Tom," she whispered, barely audible, "I'm sorry." "For what?" he asked, shifting her weight carefully. "Causing trouble. I shouldn't have been out there." "You fell, Helen. That's not a crime." She tried to laugh, but it came out as a brittle, broken sound. Tom pressed her closer. He could feel her temperature dropping, and fear stung the back of his throat. He spoke not because she needed the words, her consciousness drifted in and out, but because he needed to anchor her to something. "You're not dying on me," he muttered. "Not after we made it this far." Max slowed abruptly. His tail stiffened, ears twitching in rapid, alert motion. "What do you see, boy?" Tom asked. Max padded forward cautiously, then dug at a patch of snow. The ground shifted beneath him, an unnatural sinking motion. Tom's stomach dropped. A snow bridge. Beneath it, a hidden fissure. Max backed away instantly, barking sharply, warning them to halt. Tom eyed the depression forming beneath the surface. If he'd taken 3 more steps, the crust of snow would have collapsed under him, pulling all 3 into a crevasse deep enough to bury them alive. He crouched for balance, heart pounding, and inched backward, circling wide around the fragile area. "Good boy," he breathed. "You just saved all of us." Max's bark was softer this time, almost modest, before he resumed scanning the terrain. But the incident rattled Tom more than he wanted to admit. The storm wasn't just attacking, it was reshaping the mountain beneath their feet, and they had miles to go. Tom reached into his pack with one hand, pulling out a wooden marker stick, one of several he kept for winter crossings. He jammed it into the snow every dozen steps, forming a crude line behind them. In the old days, SWAT missions used chem lights, laser pointers, and drone feeds. Tonight, he had sticks that could freeze solid in minutes. Still, it was better than nothing. He checked Helen's pulse again, weak but present. She had stopped talking, conserving energy or losing consciousness. Tom wasn't sure which terrified him more. "Stay with me, Helen," he murmured. "You made it this far. Let's finish the job." The wind shifted suddenly, an abrupt sideways blast that nearly tore the hood from Tom's head. Max staggered, legs splaying for balance. Snow danced violently across the ridge, and a low thunder-like rumble echoed somewhere above. The storm was intensifying. Tom angled his body to shield Helen, forcing his legs through the deepening drifts. Max barked twice and pushed ahead, alerting Tom to follow. They trudged forward, slow and grinding, until Tom reached into his coat to check his map, an old printed topographical chart he kept for emergencies. Before he could unfold it fully, a vicious gust ripped the paper from his hand. No. He reached out instinctively, but the wind snatched it higher, shredding the corners and sending it tumbling into the white abyss. Max barked as if scolding the storm itself. Tom bit back a curse. Without the map, they relied entirely on memory, and memory became unreliable when the landscape vanished into a single, swirling color. He looked around. No landmarks, no tree line, no recognizable slope. The wind had shifted direction again, twisting the world until Tom no longer trusted his own sense of orientation. For the first time that night, dread pierced through his practiced calm. "We're off course," he said hoarsely. "Damn it, we're completely off track." Max whined low in his throat, pressing against Tom's leg. The dog sensed the change, the uncertainty, the calculation, the danger. Tom inhaled deeply, steadying himself. He'd taught rookies for years. Fear is fine, panic is fatal. "All right," he muttered. "We improvise, just like the old days." He scanned the wind currents, noting the direction of drifting snow. If he could interpret the storm's pattern, if the air still obeyed the old geography of the ridge, he might still orient himself. But the storm was too chaotic. Every gust contradicted the last. Helen stirred faintly. "Tom," her voice was fragile, stripped to a thread. "Are we close?" He forced his tone steady. "We will be." He adjusted her weight again, ignoring the screaming protest of his back and shoulders. Max barked in a sharp rhythm. Once, twice, pause, then barked again. Tom recognized the pattern. Max was signaling a possible path. "Lead us," Tom said. The German shepherd turned northward, pushing toward a faint rise in the terrain. Tom hesitated. North didn't feel right. His instincts tugged in the opposite direction. But instincts could lie in storms. Dogs rarely did. "Okay, boy," Tom said. "Take point." They followed him, battling the winds, carving progress inch by brutal inch. No matter how many steps they took, the storm erased them instantly, leaving no sign of passage. The world was endless, white and endless cold. Tom's breaths grew harsher, stinging his lungs. His arms trembled under Helen's weight, his legs burned with fatigue. He pushed on, because stopping meant death. Max suddenly halted again, his body stiffened, ears flattened. Tom tensed. Another fissure? But Max didn't dig this time. Instead, he pressed close to Tom's leg, trembling, not from fear, but from cold and exhaustion. The dog's endurance had limits, and the storm had punished him mercilessly. Tom knelt in the snow beside him, brushing frost from the dog's muzzle. "Stay with me, Max. I need you." Max nuzzled Tom's glove weakly, then forced himself upright. Even now, he was loyal beyond reason. "Good," Tom whispered. "Just a little farther." They moved again, but Tom felt the truth deepening. They were lost. Completely, utterly lost, and dawn was nowhere near. The storm wrapped itself around the mountain like a tightening fist, compressing sound, swallowing distance, and dimming the world to a trembling dome of white. Tom Granger pushed forward until his legs nearly buckled, then finally conceded to the reality that they could not advance blindly any farther. Survival demanded pause, not stubbornness, and he knew that better than anyone. He scanned the ridge through stinging flakes until the blurred shape of a massive pine, a survivor among trees, emerged like a dark pillar against the blizzard. "There," he breathed. Max barked weakly in acknowledgement, tail low but spirit unbroken. Tom carried Helen beneath the sheltering sweep of the great pine's branches. Snow had piled deep around the trunk, but the upper limbs intercepted enough of the storm that it created a hollowed alcove, just enough to stage a temporary refuge. He knelt, lowering Helen gently onto a dry patch he brushed free of ice. Her breaths came in thready exhalations, fog rising faintly in the air. Tom pulled off his outer coat, a heavy, insulated parka that had lasted him through years of winter rescues, and hung it like a curtain across two low branches, creating a windbreak. Then he took out a secondary wool jacket from his pack, layering it over Helen. It wasn't enough for comfort, but enough for survival. For now. Max circled twice, then pressed his body against Helen's side. His warmth seeped through the blankets, and he lay still, accepting the responsibility without command. Tom pulled out his emergency fire kit, a compact steel tin filled with tinder, waterproof matches, and a magnesium striker. His hands shook from the cold, but muscle memory guided him well. Sparks flew, catching on a bundle of shaved wood curls he had kept dry inside his shirt. A small flame bloomed, fighting the wind like a fragile heartbeat. Tom shielded it with both hands, coaxing it into a steady burn. Soon, a fist-sized fire flickered under the pine canopy, its glow faint but defiant. Helen's eyes fluttered open at the warmth. "Where are we?" Tom sat beside her. "Temporary shelter. We'll stay until visibility improves." "Is it safe?" she whispered. "Safe enough," he answered, though the truth carried more weight. They were balanced on the knife edge of survival. After several minutes, Helen's breathing eased. Color, faint but real, returned to her cheeks. Tom allowed himself one breath of relief. She wasn't slipping away. Not yet. Snow hissed around their tiny fire, and the storm's roar dulled into a muted thrum. With a momentary lull between gusts, Helen stirred. "You remind me of my husband," she murmured. Tom blinked, surprised. "How's that?" "He never knew when to quit either," she said weakly, a tiny smile tugging her lips. "Always helping others, even when it cost him." Tom looked down, startled by the reflection in her words. He fed another stick to the fire. "Helen," he said, gently, "you don't owe me anything." She shook her head. "But I do. No one's come for me in years. My husband passed 20 winters ago. I lived alone since, too stubborn to leave our home." Her voice cracked, though not from the cold. The silence became company, and then a prison. Tom felt that sentence like a physical blow. Silence had been his own prison for years, ever since that last mission overseas, the one where he came home but a teammate did not. He had never forgiven himself for surviving. "You're not alone tonight," he said quietly. Helen's eyes glistened. "And you? Have you been alone long?" Tom stared at the fire, its embers glowing like fragments of memory. "Too long," he admitted. Max lifted his head then, ears swiveling sharply. His muscles tensed. He stood, stepping away from Helen and into the wind barrier Tom had built, nose pointed toward the storm. "What is it, boy?" Tom whispered. Max listened, truly listened, the way only a working dog could, filtering layers of sound that humans could not detect. Then he barked once, sharp, definitive. Something metallic echoed faintly through the storm, a distant clang. Tom stiffened. "Tools," he murmured. "Equipment?" Max barked again. It didn't sound like the random noise of shifting ice. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. Tom's mind raced through possibilities. There was only one man-made structure near this ridge besides his own cabin, the old ranger station, half abandoned but still kept for emergencies. It sat carved into the side of the northern slope, a reinforced shelter built for blizzard conditions. Most years it was locked and used for supply storage, but if wind or snow had exposed part of the structure, something might have shifted, creating the metallic sound. Or someone might be trapped inside, or there might be working radio equipment. Hope. Faint, improbable, but real. Helen noticed the change in Tom's face. "What is it?" "A chance," Tom answered. "If it's the ranger station, there might be tools, blankets, maybe even a functioning transmitter." Helen exhaled shakily. "Can we make it?" Tom glanced at Max, who stood ready, wind pulling at his thick coat. "If Max says it's there," Tom murmured, "then it's there." He weighed the risk. Leaving the shelter meant stepping back into the storm's jaws. Staying meant watching Helen's strength fade with every hour. No one was coming. No signals could reach. No roads could open. They were alone on the ridge. Unless that station held what he prayed it did. "Tom?" Helen's voice trembled. He looked at her, truly looked. In her lined face, he saw the echo of his own grief, his own isolation. The world had abandoned them both in different ways. But they had found each other tonight. And as long as breath filled him, he would not abandon her. "I'm making a run for it," he said. "The ranger station is our only chance." Max nudged Tom's leg, ready to go. Helen tried to protest. "No, too dangerous." "Helen," Tom said softly, resting a hand on her shoulder, "not doing anything is more dangerous." She closed her eyes, defeated but trusting. Tom fed the fire one last time, ensuring it would burn in a small circle of heat for at least an hour. Then he wrapped Helen tighter in the blankets, positioning Max beside her. "Guard her," he commanded. Max lay down immediately, pressing his warmth against her side. His amber eyes never left Tom's face. Concerned, alert, resolute. "I'll be back," Tom promised. And then he stepped into the storm. The wind slammed into him like a physical wall, but he lowered his body, leaning into it, pushing forward with the grim determination of a man who had faced worse and refused to lose another battle. The metallic sound came again. Closer now, real, urgent. Tom set his jaw. Either he would return with help, or none of them would see the morning. The storm had thinned into a ragged whisper by the time Tom Granger fought his way back toward the pine shelter where Helen and Max waited. The horizon hinted at the faintest smear of gray, though the world remained more shadow than light. Tom's muscles burned. His breath scraped like cold sand in his lungs, but he refused to stop, not when hope pulsed somewhere ahead like a distant ember refusing to die. Max greeted him with a sharp bark, tail lifting in weak relief as he bounded through the snow. Frost clung to the dog's thick sable coat, and exhaustion weighed visibly on his posture, yet his amber eyes were alert, focused. He pressed against Tom's leg, guiding him back toward Helen, who lay wrapped in layers of blankets and Tom's coat. Helen's pale eyes fluttered open when she heard him approach. "You came back," she whispered, voice coarse with cold and gratitude. "Told you I would," Tom murmured, kneeling beside her. He checked her temperature and pulse, still dangerously low but holding. The noise Max heard wasn't nothing. "I saw the edge of a roof. Must belong to the ranger station." Helen's cracked lips pulled into a trembling smile. "Looks like your dog may be smarter than us both." "Wouldn't surprise me," Tom muttered, rubbing Max's ear. "He's stubborn enough." They couldn't wait for full daylight. Helen needed warmth, medical attention, and shelter stronger than a pine canopy. What Tom glimpsed in the storm, a dark, half-buried structure, might be their only chance. "All right," he said, adjusting the blankets around Helen. "We're moving. Max leads. I'll carry you." Helen didn't argue. She didn't have the strength. Tom lifted her carefully, cradling her fragile frame against his chest. Max moved forward, head low, sniffing through the storm's fading remnants. The wind still cut sharply, but it had lost the monstrous force it wielded the night before. Snow drifted like feathers rather than blades. For the first time in hours, Tom felt the faint stirrings of hope. They trudged through deep snowbanks, Max stopping occasionally to test the ground. The dog's caution saved them more than once, avoiding soft pockets of powder, steering clear of wind-carved ridges ready to collapse. As they neared the ridge's curve, a darker shape materialized through the haze. Rectangular, angular, man-made. "There," Tom whispered. "Good boy, Max, good boy." The ranger station, though half-buried under snowdrifts, stood defiantly against the storm. Built decades ago from reinforced timber and stone, it had weathered countless winters. The metal roof, partially exposed, glinted faintly under the gray sky. Tom climbed the narrow steps carved by wind and time, boots crunching against ice, and shouldered the warped door with his full weight. It groaned open reluctantly. Inside, the air was cold, but blissfully still. No screaming wind, no biting snow. Just silence and possibility. The station was small, about the size of a single-room cabin. A wooden table, metal shelving, old supply crates stacked neatly, a cot folded against one wall, and, most importantly, a radio desk mounted with an emergency transceiver. The device looked ancient, its paint chipped, its dials stiff with frost, but the emergency battery indicator flickered a faint red light. Alive. Barely, but alive. Tom laid Helen gently on the cot, wrapping her in an insulated blanket he found stored in a metal locker. Color returned to her cheeks slowly, like dawn seeping across a frozen lake. "Stay with me," he murmured. "We're almost there." Max curled up beside her, offering his body warmth. Tom turned to the radio. Years of operations had made him familiar with far more complex equipment than this, but the stakes now were personal, not tactical, not strategic. He twisted knobs, cleared static, and held down the battered transmit button. "This is Tom Granger on Timber Ridge," he said, voice steady despite exhaustion. "We have an injured elderly female, severe hypothermia. Request immediate rescue response." Static. Tom tried again, adjusted frequency, tried again. On the fourth attempt, the radio crackled with faint life. "Copy. Partial signal. Identify your location." Relief surged through him so powerfully he had to steady himself against the table. "Ranger Outpost Delta 9, he replied. "We're trapped due to storm conditions. Elderly female needs evacuation." A pause, then, "Hold position. Team deploying when wind calms. Stay on channel." Tom exhaled hard. A lifetime of discipline kept his knees from buckling. He looked over at Helen. Her eyes glistened, not from pain, but from fragile hope. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Tom said with a soft smile. "Let's get you home first." Hours passed. The storm eased into a quiet dance of drifting snowflakes. Inside the outpost, Tom kept the heater, an old propane unit, running on low to conserve fuel. Max slept with his head resting against Helen's hip, as though guarding her from the cold itself. Tom sat beside them, elbows on his knees, letting the warmth rise slowly through his body. For the first time in years, he allowed his mind to drift beyond duty, beyond survival, and he wondered unexpectedly about a future that wasn't hollow. Just after dawn broke fully, heavy boots crunched outside. Voices pierced the silence. A sharp knock rattled the door. Tom stood quickly, opening it to reveal 3 members of the mountain rescue team, bundled in thick, insulated suits. Their leader, Lieutenant Mark Hensley, stepped forward. Hensley was in his early 40s, tall, broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed brown beard framing a rugged jawline. His eyes, calm, controlled, dark green, carried the weariness of a man who had seen too many accidents in these mountains and refused to let any more lives slip through his fingers. "You're Granger?" he asked. Tom nodded. Hensley's gaze traveled from Tom to Helen and finally to Max. "Hell of a night to be on the ridge," he muttered. "Hell of a job keeping them alive." The team worked quickly, lifting Helen onto a rescue stretcher, wrapping her in thermal layers, checking her vitals. Max whined softly, pacing anxiously until Tom knelt and reassured him. "They're taking her somewhere warm," he whispered. "It's okay, boy." As they trekked back toward the main trail, sunrise washed the world in gold. The storm had broken open like a cracked shell, revealing a sky pure and clear. By the time they reached the ambulances stationed at the mountain's base, Helen was stable enough to speak, gripping Tom's hand with surprising strength. "You saved my life," she whispered. "Max saved us both," Tom said. Later that week, when Helen had fully recovered and the town learned what happened, people gathered in the community hall to honor Tom and Max. Children painted signs. Old neighbors clapped him on the back. Even Tom's quiet stoicism couldn't withstand the wave of gratitude. But the loudest cheer came when the mayor placed a small collar medallion around Max's neck, engraved with a title that made Tom's throat tighten. Guardian of the Storm. Spring arrived slowly at Timber Ridge. Snow melted from rooftops. Birds returned to the pines. And one quiet morning, Tom looked up to see Helen walking carefully along the path toward his cabin, a cane in hand and a warm smile on her wrinkled face. "The doctors say mountain air is good for old bones," she announced softly. "And I don't want to be alone anymore." Tom exhaled, a warmth rising inside him he hadn't felt in decades. "Then you're welcome here," he said. Max bounded forward, tail wagging wildly, welcoming her home. The winter that nearly killed them had become the thread that wove them into a family. A battered, unlikely, grateful family. And as dawn light spilled over Timber Ridge each morning, three hearts that once lived in solitude now beat together in quiet, enduring warmth. In the end, Tom, Helen, and Max's survival was more than a story about endurance in a winter storm. It was a quiet reminder that miracles don't always arrive in flashes of light. Sometimes they come through a stranger's courage, the loyalty of a dog, or the gentle hand of God guiding ordinary people through extraordinary nights. In our own lives, we often walk through storms we don't speak about. Loneliness, fear, regret, or the feeling of being forgotten. Yet grace still finds its way to us, often in the smallest, most unexpected moments. If this story moved you or reminded you of the quiet miracles in your own life, share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment, tell us what part touched you the most, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that lift the heart and honor the unseen ways God works in our everyday lives.